I knew something was wrong the moment Brad Turner strutted into the conference room like he'd just discovered gravity. He had that oily grin plastered across his face, the same one he used whenever he was about to dump his mess on my desk and call it delegation. That morning's inbox had already warned me, though. Subject line: updated discounted tier guidelines. No explanation, no briefing, just a cryptic memo screaming corporate sabotage disguised as generosity. After nearly a decade at Westbridge Consulting, I'd learned to decode that kind of nonsense. It meant Brad was about to spin another half-baked promise to a client, and I'd be the one scrambling to make it look like strategy instead of malpractice. Usually, I was right. By then, I had built the entire training workshop for Knoxwell Holdings: curriculum, simulations, assessment rubrics, even contingency modules in case their software coughed mid-demo. I had spent so many nights mapping Victor Lang's executive team that I probably knew their caffeine preferences better than their own HR department. And still, my reward for months of unpaid overtime was Brad's trademark dismissal, a lazy wave of his hand as if swatting away a mosquito made of competence. "We'll circle back," he'd mutter, eyes glued to his phone, like excellence was some sort of nuisance. You'd think after 9 years of playing ghostwriter to his mediocrity, I would have stopped expecting credit. But that's the trap, isn't it? You keep telling yourself, one more quarter, one more project, one more chance to finally be recognized, and each time, the ladder just gets taller while you're still holding it steady for someone else to climb. I'd seen this pattern too many times. His empty charm, his half-smirk confidence, the way he treated foresight like it was a contagious disease. And still, I played along. Because that's what you do when your mortgage, health insurance, and your mother's prescriptions depend on the paycheck of a company that thinks loyalty is something you can pick up in the clearance aisle at Walmart. I kept my head down, built backups for my backups, packed extra HDMI cables, memorized every talking point, all while knowing Brad was sharpening his knives. That morning, as I scrolled through that ridiculous memo, a pit settled in my stomach. Something told me the bill for all those years of silence was finally coming due. People always ask why anyone stays in a job that slowly chews them up like a paper shredder. The truth is, you don't notice the grind at first. It starts small. An extra weekend here, a skipped vacation there. One, "Can you just handle this?" request that snowballs into an entire quarter of unpaid labor. You convince yourself it's temporary, that things will balance out, that the company will eventually see your sacrifices and throw you a lifeline. But 9 years later, you wake up realizing the only thing that balanced out was your sanity against their profit margins. And in my case, the scale was broken. I joined Westbridge Consulting fresh out of grad school, armed with too many degrees and just enough naive optimism to believe the brochures about culture fit and growth opportunities. My first project was a training rollout for a mid-sized logistics firm, and I stayed in the office until midnight every night to make it flawless. Guess who got the client award for innovation? Brad Turner, director of nothing but other people's sweat. I laughed it off then, thinking maybe one day I'd be the one on stage shaking hands. That day never came. Brad had a particular genius. He could spot talent like a vulture spots roadkill. Then he'd swoop in, rip off a chunk, and leave you with the carcass of burnout. He knew how to dress mediocrity in a suit and tie, and for years, I was the idiot feeding him material. Every deck I built, every framework I designed, every client I saved when his promises collapsed under the weight of reality. All of it carried his initials. Meanwhile, my inbox was a graveyard of ignored requests for promotions, raises, even just recognition that I existed beyond the cubicle. But life outside the office doesn't pause just because your career stalls. I had bills, a mortgage on a condo that looked better in photos than in person, and a mother whose prescriptions racked up faster than her insurance covered. Stability was the rope I clung to, even as it was tightening into a noose. Leaving felt impossible. Every time I thought about it, I pictured unpaid rent, medical collections, and me serving coffee to ex-clients who used to clap for my presentations. Fear has a way of disguising itself as loyalty, and I wore that disguise for years. Looking back, I realize Brad understood that. He knew exactly how far he could push before breaking me, how much flattery to sprinkle between insults to keep me chained. He dangled promises like carrots. Next quarter, we'll revisit titles. This client could open doors for you. We're like family here. Corporate family, the kind that never hugs you but will absolutely throw you under the bus at Thanksgiving. And I swallowed it, nodding, smiling, hoping the next project would be the one where I finally got credit. Instead, all I got was older, more tired, and more invisible. The irony is, I wasn't incompetent. Quite the opposite. I was the scaffolding holding up an empire built on Brad's smoke and mirrors. Without me, the walls should have already caved in. But scaffolding doesn't get plaques or bonuses. It just gets dismantled when the building is finished. What I didn't know yet, as I sat in that office rereading his discounted tier memo, was that the scaffolding was about to walk away. And when it did, the whole damn structure would collapse loud enough for the entire city to hear. When Knoxwell Holdings came knocking, you could practically feel the tremor ripple through Westbridge's hallways. Knoxwell wasn't just another client. They were the client. A corporate behemoth with more subsidiaries than I had pairs of shoes. Land them, and your firm got prestige, stability, and bragging rights that echoed across the industry. Lose them, and you might as well start shopping for cardboard boxes. Brad strutted around the office like he had personally invented Knoxwell's supply chain. "This is our golden goose," he announced in a meeting, beaming like a televangelist who'd just spotted a new donor. Funny thing, though, I was the one who actually had to feed the goose. I poured everything into that workshop: curriculum, live simulations, customized dashboards, predictive assessments. Hell, I even made backup videos in case their network went down. I lived on energy drinks and the cold hum of my laptop for weeks. I knew every pain point Knoxwell executives wanted solved, every bottleneck they were terrified to admit publicly, and every buzzword their board loved to hear. I didn't just build a training, I built a performance safety net disguised as a workshop. And I thought, maybe this was it. Maybe this was the project that would finally force Brad to give me credit. Spoiler, it wasn't. As the workshop date approached, I started noticing the erasures. My name disappearing from draft agendas. My initials replaced by Brad's on the version logs. Invitations to pre-meeting dinners where suddenly my seat wasn't needed. When I checked the official meeting deck, every slide had his name on it. His fonts, his branding, like my sleepless nights had been neatly repackaged into his personal miracle. I stared at the calendar invite one morning and realized not only was I not the speaker, I wasn't even on the attendee list. Brad had scrubbed me out like I was a coffee stain on his big day. The final insult came just hours before go time. Brad cornered me in the hallway, still reeking of that synthetic cologne he thought screamed success, but mostly just gave me headaches. He leaned in with that lizard grin, lowered his voice like we were plotting espionage, and said, "Quick word, you'll be running today's session, as a courtesy." I blinked so hard, I swear my optic nerves almost detached. Courtesy? Months of design, nights sacrificed, data models triple-checked, and he had the audacity to call it charity work? I asked him to clarify, though my voice was already sharp enough to cut glass. He explained like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. Think of it as goodwill. We've had pushback on pricing. This will help the relationship. Translation: work for free, make me look like a hero, and shut up about it. Something inside me cracked then. Not loud, not theatrical. Just a clean, internal snap. like a rope giving way after years of strain. I didn't scream. I didn't throw my badge at him. I just smiled, nodded once, and walked back toward the conference room in silence. Because in that instant, I knew two things. One, Brad was about to humiliate himself in front of Knoxwell's top brass. And two, I was finally done carrying his corpse of a career on my shoulders. The room was already filling when I stepped inside. Knoxwell executives settled around the long mahogany table, sleek suits, sharp eyes, the kind of crowd that could sniff weakness before you even uncapped a marker. At the head sat Victor Lang, the elusive CEO himself, flipping through one of my handouts like it contained state secrets. He didn't look at me, just muttered, "Who put this together? It's good." I opened my mouth, but before I could answer, Brad burst in with 2 coffees, one labeled Victor, the other blank. Guess who didn't get one? Victor barely acknowledged him. Brad fumbled his notes, cleared his throat, and started his little dog and pony show. But I could see it instantly. The custom analytics Victor's team had specifically requested were missing. Brad hadn't prepared them. He was banking on me to swoop in, like always, to rescue him mid-freefall. Except this time, I wasn't going to. This time, the rope stayed in my pocket. The air outside the conference room felt charged, like the silence before a thunderstorm. The kind that makes your skin prickle even indoors. I busied myself lining up chairs like some neurotic wedding planner, double-checking handouts that already had no errors, anything to keep my hands from trembling with rage. That's when Brad grabbed my arm. Lightly, but enough to make my blood boil. "Remember," he hissed, breath thick with stale energy drink. "This is goodwill. Smile, deliver, and make me look like I promised." His grip said, "Conspirator." My patience said, "Expiration date." I pulled back just enough to make the message clear. Don't touch me like you own me. I walked into that room, my heels hitting the carpet like a countdown. 7 executives stared back. Not 3 as we had been told, which meant the stakes had just tripled. Victor Lang sat at the end, perfectly still, sipping water like a man who already knew something was about to go wrong. My laptop was connected, slides glowing on the massive screen, the title page proudly displaying the work I had spent months perfecting. My name sat in the corner, small, almost hidden, but there. I clicked the remote. The slide brightened. Amanda Collins. I took one breath, looked at Victor, then set the remote down. "I won't be leading today's session," I said, voice steady, almost casual, though my pulse was hammering. "I was just informed this workshop will be delivered at no charge. I wasn't consulted on that arrangement, and I cannot represent work that's been devalued to 0. Apologies for the disruption." For a moment, no one moved. Mouths hung open like a synchronized swim team missing their cue. One executive dropped his pen. Through the glass wall, I could see Brad's face bloom crimson, the kind of color cardiologists write warnings about. He gestured wildly, mouthing words I didn't bother to read. I didn't explain. I didn't rant. I simply gathered my bag, nodded politely to the table, and turned toward the door. The walk down that hallway felt endless, every step echoing in my ears like a verdict. The receptionist blinked at me with a confused half-smile as I strode past, probably wondering why the woman who had prepped this entire circus was leaving before the show began. I didn't stop to answer. I didn't owe anyone an explanation for valuing my work. When the elevator doors closed, I caught my reflection in the mirrored panel, shoulders squared, eyes bright, a strange calm spreading where panic should have been. Outside, the July sun hit me full in the face, no longer oppressive but cleansing, almost like baptism. For the first time in 9 years, I wasn't waiting for permission. I wasn't holding up someone else's empire. I was free, and I didn't know what would come next. All I knew was this. Whatever future I walked into, Brad wouldn't be walking there with me. I'd barely made it 3 steps across the blistering asphalt of the parking lot when I heard the door open behind me. For a split second, I thought Brad had followed me out, ready to hiss threats about insubordination or wave the company handbook in my face like it was scripture. But the footsteps were measured, calm, and when I turned, it wasn't him. It was Victor Lang. He looked exactly the way a man who ran half the Midwest should look. Unshaken, deliberate, carrying himself like gravity bent slightly in his direction. No entourage, no assistant, just him. In his hand was a simple rectangle of cardstock, crisp white with embossed lettering. "Ms. Collins," he said, his tone even, unreadable. "The prep work, the frameworks, the analysis, that wasn't Brad, was it?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Because how do you answer a man who can see straight through the curtain you've been trapped behind for almost a decade? He didn't wait for my reply. He extended the card between 2 fingers. "Senior Vice President, Organizational Development, Knoxwell Holdings," it read. Not the branch we serviced, not some side division. This was the mothership. "Let's talk," Victor continued, slipping the card into my hand. "Not as a courtesy, not at a discount, something larger." Then, without fanfare, he turned and walked back inside, leaving me standing there with my heartbeat rattling louder than the cicadas screaming in the summer heat. I slid into my car, engine off, gripping the steering wheel as if it might bolt away. The card sat on the passenger seat, its quiet authority filling the cabin like a secret too big to speak aloud. For years, I'd been invisible, the scaffolding holding up someone else's sham empire. And now here it was, a lifeline, a key, maybe even a detonator. Brad was inside fumbling through excuses, drowning in front of executives who finally saw past his empty grin. And I was outside, sunlight beating down, clutching the first real door I'd ever been offered. I didn't know yet whether I was brave enough to walk through it. But I did know one thing. My days of being the ghost behind Brad's curtain were over. I barely slept that night. Not because I was anxious, but because my brain felt like someone had finally kicked it back into gear after years of running in neutral. I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad, scribbling ideas the way I used to, before Brad wrung the originality out of me like water from a dish rag. Training modules, metrics that actually mattered, ways to measure comprehension beyond the feel-good smile sheets Brad loved to parade around. My pen couldn't keep up with the rush. By 2 a.m, I had pages of frameworks, acronyms, and workflows taped to my wall like a conspiracy theorist connecting red string. Except this wasn't paranoia. This was clarity. The next morning, I called an attorney a friend had once recommended and asked a simple question. How fast can I set up an LLC? The answer? 48 hours if I didn't blink. By the time the weekend ended, Northbeam Consulting LLC officially existed. Clean name, strong, forgettable to everyone except the people who mattered. I stared at the paperwork like it was a birth certificate. For the first time in 9 years, I had something that was mine. Victor didn't waste time. Monday morning, I met him at one of those coffee shops that smell like ambition, quiet jazz, baristas who probably code on the side, and tables filled with people plotting IPOs. He sat alone with a notebook, flipping through pages like he'd already started building a plan with my name on it. "I'll get straight to it," he said as soon as I sat down. "Our vendor training pipeline is a mess. Fragmented, inconsistent, overpriced. Some of the worst material we've seen came from third parties, yours included." He didn't need to name Brad's firm. We both knew. Then he leaned forward. "Your prep work? Best we've seen all quarter. But more importantly, we know it was yours, not his. We want to explore a direct collaboration, not a job, a consulting opportunity. Quiet for now, but meaningful. I wanted to scream yes so loudly the windows rattled, but instead I swallowed, nodded, and said, I'd need to form an LLC. He smiled like the thought had already crossed his desk. We'll connect you with legal. You'll evaluate our current partners, identify redundancies, suggest structural changes. You'll have budget, you'll have autonomy. One last thing. He slid a folder across the table. Inside was a vendor list spanning Knoxwell's sprawling empire. Near the bottom, in faint gray font, was Westbridge Consulting. My old company, Brad's Kingdom. Flagged for review. My pulse spiked. This wasn't just a lifeline. This was a wrecking ball disguised as an opportunity. The first assignment came fast. 3 pilot audits across different divisions: warehousing, last-mile distribution, and vendor onboarding. Each one messy, inefficient, all tangled in the same recycled training modules I had written years ago under Brad's thumb. I knew every flaw by heart. I didn't even need to dig deep to see how brittle it all was. Outdated terminology, duplicate content, compliance violations that could trigger OSHA investigations. Westbridge's fingerprints were all over it. Knoxwell handed me a burner laptop and a guest badge with a QR code, telling me to move discreetly. This stays off the org chart for now, said Levi Fay, a compliance lead who seemed equal parts lawyer and assassin. I nodded, tucking the badge into my pocket. A week ago, I was lining up chairs for Brad's ego parade. Now, I was embedded inside one of the largest holding companies in the Midwest, dismantling the very foundation Brad had built his career on. And the wild part? I wasn't scared anymore. I was exhilarated, because for once, I wasn't patching holes in someone else's leaky boat. I was building my own damn ship, and Brad didn't even know the storm was already rolling in. The deeper I dug into Knoxwell's vendor training ecosystem, the more it felt like forensic work. Except instead of bloodstains and fingerprints, I was sifting through outdated PowerPoints, half-baked compliance binders, and recycled PDFs pretending to be strategy. The first thing I noticed was duplication. Entire modules replicated word for word across different divisions, only the company logos swapped out. Then came the errors. Typos in compliance terminology, instructions that contradicted federal guidelines, even a safety slide advising forklift operators to improvise if procedures weren't clear. Improvisation. With forklifts, I nearly choked on my coffee. I started tagging every issue in a color-coded system. Yellow for outdated, orange for duplicated, red for dangerous or unsalvageable. Within 48 hours, my dashboard looked like a Christmas tree set on fire. And guess which vendor's name appeared most often in the red column? Westbridge Consulting, Brad's empire of shortcuts and smoke. When I compiled the preliminary audit, I felt a rush I hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't just about exposing failure. It was about finally quantifying what I'd been screaming into the void all those years at Westbridge. I built heat maps that showed how Westbridge's cookie-cutter templates had directly contributed to system slowdowns, vendor churn, and compliance fines. I created timelines illustrating how one outdated assessment had delayed a distribution rollout by 3 days, costing Knoxwell nearly $500,000. Numbers don't lie, and these numbers were screaming. The moment of truth came when Levi called me into her office, a sleek glass box perched high above downtown Chicago. She slid a memo across the table, confidential stamped in bold red. "We want you to present your findings to the Procurement Executive Committee," she said. I blinked. "Already?" She smirked. "When we're bleeding, we don't wait for the paperwork to dry." So I walked into that boardroom with my laptop, my charts, and 9 years of pent-up fury disguised as professionalism. I clicked to the heat map slide, and there it was. Westbridge Consulting, dead center in the bottom left quadrant labeled high-risk failure. I didn't have to embellish, didn't have to spit Brad's name into the microphone. The data did the execution for me. Could you elaborate on why this vendor underperforms across all metrics? One executive asked, eyebrows arched. My voice didn't waver. Recycled content, no customization by industry vertical, templated assessments with no enforcement, and a pattern of client dissatisfaction masked by aggressive upselling tactics. Their model relies on inertia, on clients not realizing how ineffective the product really is. A silence followed, heavy, electric. Finally, the head of procurement closed his notebook with a snap and muttered, "It's about damn time someone said it." By the end of that week, Knoxwell's vendor calendar for the annual development summit went live. Every major partner was listed, each with a booth and a presentation slot. I scrolled once, twice, 3 times. Westbridge Consulting wasn't there. Not under confirmed, not under pending. Nowhere. They hadn't been overlooked, they'd been erased. I leaned back in my chair, heart thumping. Brad didn't know yet. Or maybe he did, and he was still drafting one of his infamous miscommunication emails, blaming an intern or a clerical error. But I knew the truth. Knoxwell had already begun freezing him out. The guillotine wasn't just raised, it had already dropped. Meanwhile, my phone buzzed with messages from old colleagues still trapped in Westbridge's crumbling circus. Rebecca from HR. "Hey girl, heard you're doing exciting things. So happy for you." Ethan from sales. "Quick call. Would love to pick your brain." And Sarah, my old deskmate, with a single line. "Do I need to start job hunting?" It wasn't curiosity. It was panic. The digital scent of a sinking ship. For me, it was vindication. I had spent years being the nameless ghost who cleaned up Brad's messes, who built cathedrals with his name on the cornerstone. Now the spotlight was squarely on him, and instead of glory, it revealed every crack, every shortcut, every corner he'd cut. And as I packed up my notes that night, I realized something delicious. The story was no longer about me trying to prove my worth. It was about Brad being forced to face his lack of it. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday, slid under my apartment door like some passive-aggressive pizza delivery. Heavy cream paper, embossed logo, my name scrawled in that familiar, self-important font. Inside, 6 pages of legal melodrama signed by none other than Brad Turner. The subject line alone could have won an award for unintentional comedy. Immediate termination of competitive engagement and notice of client solicitation. I sat on the couch, letter in hand, laughing so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. The claims were absurd. According to Brad, I had misappropriated intellectual property, poached proprietary client relationships, and breached post-employment restrictions. Bold words for a man whose most original contribution to any project was the phrase, "Let's circle back." I flipped through each page, the accusations escalating like a badly written thriller. The kicker? He claimed I had violated my non-compete. There was just one small problem. There was no non-compete, no NDA, no non-solicit, nothing. For 9 years, Brad had loved to say, "We're a family here," which apparently translated to 0 legal paperwork, until the moment one of us dared to leave the dinner table. Still, fear is funny that way. Even when you know the letter is baseless, your hands tremble as you reread the words. I felt grime clinging to me, irrational but sticky, like maybe I had done something wrong by finally valuing myself. My first instinct was panic. My second was rage. My third was to scan the whole thing, attach it to an email, and fire it off to Knoxwell's legal team with a subject line that read, "Incoming circus." Thoughts? Levi replied in under 10 minutes. "Already flagged it. Sit tight." By noon, I was on a video call with Knoxwell's associate counsel, a woman named Mariah who radiated the calm, lethal energy of a seasoned litigator. She smiled at the camera like this was foreplay. "Just to be clear," she said, sliding Brad's letter onto her screen as though it were evidence in a murder trial. Knoxwell contracted your LLC, Northbeam Consulting, for development of training frameworks. You are not, and never have been, bound by exclusivity, confidentiality, or non-compete clauses with Westbridge. We checked twice. She winked. Mariah's drafted response was short, brutal, and surgical. It highlighted every factual error, reaffirmed the legitimacy of my engagement with Knoxwell, and closed with a line that made me snort aloud. Further contact of this nature will be considered harassment. By 3 o'clock, the email had been sent. By 5, Westbridge's inboxes went silent. No rebuttal, no bluster, just dead air. I should have been celebrating, but I knew the game. Bullies like Brad don't vanish after one slap on the wrist. They retreat, regroup, and start whispering in the shadows. But this time, he wasn't whispering about me. He was whispering about himself, because everyone else could finally see what I'd known for years. The Emperor hadn't just lost his clothes. He'd never had any to begin with. The first time I saw my name on an official Knoxwell document, I had to blink 3 times to make sure it wasn't caffeine-induced hallucination. Not in the footnotes, not buried in the appendix. Right there, bold as daylight, on the title slide. Vendor Retraining Initiative, Phase 1. Lead, Amanda Collins, Northbeam Consulting. My fonts, my framework, my actual voice. For years, I had been the ghostwriter of Brad's empty sermons, watching him preen on stage while I sat invisible in the back row. Now the credits were mine, stamped into the corporate bloodstream of a multi-billion-dollar empire. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like oxygen. The rollout happened faster than I expected. Within a week, my new training modules had been deployed across 5 regional hubs and 1 international branch. I had gutted the fluff. No more chirpy icebreakers, no stock photo smiles, no jargon-bloated mission statements. Instead, I used case studies that hurt. Real stories of shipment delays costing hundreds of thousands, compliance gaps triggering fines, vendors walking away because processes made no sense. If you clicked the wrong option in my simulation, the system didn't say, "Oops, try again." It told you, "You just flushed $300,000 down the drain." Clarity, not comfort. Feedback poured in from the field, and for once it wasn't sugar-coated. Supervisors wrote things like, "Finally, this makes sense. Best onboarding we've had in years." One email from a Czech branch manager made me laugh out loud. "My team now calls this the Collins system. Don't worry, we mean it as a compliment. A name, my name." After 9 years of erasure, the industry was finally saying it out loud. Knoxwell wasn't subtle about their approval either. Levi stopped me in the hallway after a briefing, glanced at the prototype on my tablet, and said, "You know, people assume consultants just tear things down, but you're actually building something." I shrugged, because admitting how much that sentence meant to me would have cracked the composure I was working so hard to maintain. But inside, I was grinning like a kid handed the keys to Disneyland. The momentum kept building. I was invited to vendor evaluation huddles, not as a guest scribbling notes, but as a contributor with my own seat at the table. My PowerPoints no longer wore camouflage. They carried my logo, my LLC's name, in full color. One slide in particular earned me the longest silence of my career. A heat map plotting vendor effectiveness against cost, delivery, and compliance. Westbridge Consulting sat in the bottom left quadrant. High risk, low impact, dead weight. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Executives leaned forward, squinting like they couldn't believe the name. Phones lit up under the table. One procurement head whispered, almost to himself, "It's about damn time someone said it." Meanwhile, Westbridge tried to spin their downfall with vague LinkedIn posts. Refocusing our offerings for niche markets, exciting transitions ahead, the usual corporate hospice language. No logos, no client shoutouts, no faces. Just empty slogans trying to mask the smell of decay. My inbox, on the other hand, was buzzing. Recruiters, industry peers, former colleagues testing the waters with cautious emojis and late-night DMs. The message was clear. Brad's empire was bleeding out, and my system was the scalpel. One night, sitting in my apartment with a glass of wine and a glowing laptop, I realized something profound. I wasn't climbing a ladder anymore. I had stopped begging for rungs, stopped holding the ladder steady while someone else climbed. I was building the damn building now, brick by brick, module by module, with my name etched into the foundation. And no memo, no smirk, no hollow threat from Brad could ever take that away again. The end didn't come with fireworks. It came with a memo. Knoxwell's vendor directory updated quietly on a Monday morning. No press release, no headlines, just a silent refresh of the internal system. I logged in out of habit, coffee in hand, and scrolled through the list. Preferred suppliers, approved trainers, strategic partners. Westbridge Consulting wasn't there. Not archived, not flagged, just scrubbed clean, like they had never existed. Vendor 29133, deleted. I stared at the screen longer than I should have, letting the weight of it settle. For nearly a decade, I had built my life around that company, its deadlines, its demands, its scraps of validation. And now it had been erased in a single keystroke by people who no longer owed Brad even a courtesy email. He hadn't been delisted. He had been annihilated. The dominoes fell quickly after that. Within days, old clients began calling me, their voices tight with suspicion. Amanda, quick question. Did you work on the compliance rollout last quarter? Because we were told that was Westbridge, but the structure looks a lot like yours. They weren't the only ones asking. 2 other accounts, both referred to Westbridge during my tenure, started reviewing their contracts. The glossy brochures Brad had waved around for years had turned into smoking guns. Suddenly, his lies were evidence, and I was the one holding the receipts. The exodus began soon after. Sarah from HR updated her profile. Open to work. Ethan from sales posted a vague farewell note about new adventures. Junior consultants who used to DM me at midnight begging for guidance were now begging for job referrals. Westbridge's LinkedIn page, once a constant stream of motivational quotes and inflated client wins, went silent. No posts, no likes. Just a profile frozen in suspended animation, like a wax figure of relevance. And then came the boardroom moment. Knoxwell had scheduled a review session for all legacy vendors, a kind of post-mortem for the partnerships that had bled them dry. I was seated at the head of the table now, back straight, pen poised. Not a guest, not an assistant, but a decision-maker. 11 executives flanked the table, each with their own laptops open to my dashboards. The room hummed with inevitability. That's when the door opened, unannounced, and in walked Brad. He didn't look like the man who used to swagger around Westbridge's halls. The cologne, the smirk, the greasy confidence, they were gone. His face was pale, drawn tight like he hadn't slept in days. He scanned the room, searching for allies, for anyone willing to throw him a line. No one met his gaze. When his eyes landed on me, they froze. I didn't flinch. I didn't smile. I simply folded my hands over the review notes and said, Mr. Turner, thank you for coming. We'll be evaluating past performance today. I believe you were next. The silence that followed wasn't dramatic. It was surgical. He opened his mouth, maybe to deliver some rehearsed plea, but no sound came. Just a twitch of his jaw, the subtle collapse of a man who had finally run out of narrative. He sat at the far end of the table, empty-handed. No one passed him a packet. No one offered him water. The review began without him. Slide after slide lit up the screen. Compliance gaps, recycled content, failed assessments. All the things I had once tried to fix in secret while he told me to stop overcomplicating. Now they were writ large on 42-inch displays, dissected like malpractice under a microscope. He was no longer the magician behind the curtain. He was the trick exposed. When the meeting ended, executives filed out with quiet nods and buzzing phones. Brad lingered, waiting for someone, anyone, to acknowledge him. No one did. He shuffled out without a word, shoulders slumped, the door closing behind him with the soft finality of a coffin lid. I stayed behind, sipping the last of my cold coffee, staring out at the Chicago skyline. The sun glared off the glass towers, sharp and merciless. Somewhere in that city, Brad was pacing, drafting emails, convincing himself this was salvageable. But it wasn't. The locks had already been changed. And as I gathered my notes, one thought crystallized in my mind, clean and undeniable. The last workshop I ran for Brad wasn't free. It just carried a different invoice, one he would spend the rest of his career paying.